Darkcast Network. The light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
Two little girls in Chicago are left home alone while their mom goes to work. This is not the first time 10-year-old Tionda Bradley has been left in charge of her 3-year-old sister, Diamond. Their mother, Tracey, was raising them on her own, along with 2 other siblings. But on this day, Tracey would return home to an empty apartment with no sign of her girls other than a mysterious note. What followed was the biggest manhunt in Chicago's history at the time, but few clues would emerge in the search for the sisters. Over the years, several people have claimed to be either Tionda or Diamond, with the most recent claim coming from a woman in Texas, just this year. The FBI is currently awaiting DNA tests, while the Bradley sisters' family hopes against hope that this mystery will finally be solved. When a person goes missing, there's a special kind of pain in the not knowing. I want to tell you the stories of those who never came home. Today, I want to tell you the story of Diamond and Tionda Bradley. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And this is And Then They Were Gone. Everyone.
Welcome back.
Thank you for joining us once again after our brief unplanned hiatus. I've gotten over my face shingles.
I mean, you didn't have to specifically say face shingles. You could have just said shingles.
No, I need people to know that it was face shingles because I feel like, people power through regular shingles, but these are face shingles. And that was exceptionally rude.
And that was right after you had a really bad case of poison ivy.
I know. I was on prednisone for 12 days, and that's, I think, why I got shingles, because my immune system is all messed up because of the prednisone and the poison ivy, attacking my body and whatever. I had shingles. It sucked. But we are back, and we brought you a wonderful episode of Horrifying History last week with Brenda about Granger Taylor. So I hope you all enjoyed that. And be sure to check her out in all of the Darkcast Network shows, which you can do by going to darkcastnetwork.com. This case, for people who follow true crime, is very well known. And I do know that there are some cases that true crime people know about that I know everybody else doesn't know about. But I honestly thought that this one was one that a lot of people kind of had at least a little bit of familiarity with. And by people, I don't mean you, obviously.
Yeah, I was waiting for it.
But, when I was researching this case, I got to the end of the Google results extremely quickly, way faster than I was expecting for a case that happened over 20 years ago. And, part of the reason that I hadn't done this yet is because I was everybody knows about Diamond and Tionda Bradley. But, even if they do, it doesn't matter. They still haven't been found, and they need to come home. And plus, as I kind of alluded to in the intro, possible big news in this case is coming.
I mean, I shockingly don't know this story. So I'm excited to hear about the potential big news.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get started, we have a few new people who have joined us over on Patreon. So we want to say thank you so much to Tanya S., Katie U., and Irene R. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
If you'd like to get in on the action and join at any level, you'll not only get these episodes early and ad-free, but you'll get your own copy of the And Then They Were Gone ebook. But for now, let's get into the story of Diamond and Tionda Bradley. Tionda Z. Bradley was born on January 20th, 1991, and Diamond Yvette Bradley was born on November 25th, 1997, to Tracey Bradley. The girls lived with their mother and 2 other sisters on the 3500 block of South Lake Park Avenue in Chicago. Their oldest sister, Rita, was 12 at the time, and their other sister, Victoria, was 8. Diamond and Tionda were kind of like interspersed with these other kids. Tionda was the second oldest, and Diamond was the baby.
Got it.
Diamond's father is said to be Tracey's on-again, off-again boyfriend, a man named George Washington.
Really?
Yeah. She had a, like I said, on-again, off-again relationship, but they were on-again kind of maybe in the summer of 2001 when this is taking place. Now, Tionda's father hasn't been confirmed by Tracey, and that would become an issue later in the investigation, so we will talk about that. Tionda was a responsible and talented child. Her aunt said that she would always be carrying little Diamond around like she was her own daughter. She also loved to run and do gymnastics and dance, and she'd like often win prizes and, things like that for doing that. She was just one of those kids who was good at a lot of different things. Though she could be shy in public, she had a big personality around her family, and everyone says she was just overall a great kid. Diamond was a typical youngest child. She was 5 years younger than her next older sister. So, she would follow them around. She would copy them. She would steal their food. She'd make a mess, typical baby of the family stuff. But, as they often are, she was cute enough to get away with it.
Nature's defense mechanism.
Exactly. Most reports say that the two other sisters weren't at the apartment on July 6th because they had stayed the night at their grandmother's house. However, there was one source that I read that said that Victoria and Rita, the other two sisters, were actually living with their grandmother at the time because Tracey was unable to care for all 4 children. Apparently, none of the girls' fathers were involved in their lives. Not even George, who was literally still hanging around. So that's a whole thing. We're going to talk a lot about George in this episode.
Okay. I was kind of confused as to why the 10-year-old was watching the 3-year-old.
Instead of the 12-year-old. Yeah. I don't know. It could just be a simple case of Tionda and Diamond were just really close. And so that's why, they stuck together.
Yeah.
But that's been a question that a lot of people have asked over the years. Why, wasn't the 2 oldest children with one and the 2 youngest children with the other or something like that? Why did it kind of skip around like that? I think that's caused a lot of confusion for people.
Well, I don't mean to be judgy, but 10 is kind of young to be.
It is. And yes, we'll obviously get way into that because that clearly, when they both go missing, that clearly becomes a huge factor.
Yeah, right.
So George, who, Diamond's father, came over on the night of the 5th or early morning of the 6th. I've seen reports that have varied anywhere between 2 and 4:30 a.m. that he came over. Tracey worked at nearby Robert Taylor Park, where she prepared lunches for the kids in summer camp. She left for her shift around 6 a.m., and George, who was there for sometime between 2 to 4 hours, drove her to work. Tracey kissed the girls goodbye before she left. They were still asleep, but, Tionda kind of woke up, and she reminded them to keep the apartment door locked, and she would be back that afternoon. Now, the next day, July 7th, was Victoria's birthday. So Victoria was the third child, the one in between Tionda and Diamond. So it was her birthday the next day. So Tracey, George, and the kids were supposed to go on a camping trip in Indiana.
All of the kids?
Yeah, from what it sounds like, all of the kids were supposed to go. Yes, it's a different state, but Chicago, Illinois, Indiana are very close to each other. So if you're going camping, going to Indiana is a totally normal thing for you to do. So apparently the plan was for George to pick Tracey up from work when she was done and then bring her home. And then I don't know if they were going to go pick up the other girls or if the other girls were going to come, later or what that deal was. But at some point, they were all supposed to meet up that day and go on their trip. So before we kind of get more into this, I'm going to pause and talk about something about this day that's really bothering me. And it's not what you mentioned earlier, which is that Tracey left Tionda and Diamond home alone with Tionda in charge. As someone who was also left at home alone and in charge of a little sister way before CPS would say was appropriate, I understand how sometimes you've got to do what you got to do. And in a perfect world, like Tracey obviously would not have made that decision. It was not the best decision to make, but we don't live in a perfect world. And sometimes that's just what happens. So I can understand that. What I personally have problems with is George, because he was at the apartment in the morning. He knows that Diamond, his 3-year-old daughter, is being left in the care of Tionda, a 10-year-old girl, and he's planning on coming back to the apartment later that afternoon so they can all go on this like supposed camping trip. But instead of doing the decent thing, which would be at least taking care of Diamond, if not Tionda as well, he leaves and reportedly, and again, this is very, very reportedly, not confirmed at all, goes to his girlfriend's house.
What?
Yeah, I don't know. I only read that in one source. Not exactly sure. And then apparently he also then goes to visit his mother before picking Tracey back up at work sometime between like around 11 and 12. So it's not even like he had to go to work too, you know?
So you're talking about a span of 5 hours?
Thereabouts, yeah. 5 to 6 hours, depending. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, why didn't he just watch the kids? I mean, like he's already committing to going on an out-of-town trip with them.
Right.
For the weekend. Like,
right.
Why wouldn't he just sit in the apartment for 5 hours?
Yeah, like, it's crazy to me. Because again, like, if he had to go to work, if he was dropping Tracey off and then he had to go to work himself, it's like, okay, yeah, you get it. Again, you have to do what you have to do.
Right.
But like, it didn't sound like he was doing shit. Except not taking care of his kids. So keep that in mind.
Okay.
All right. So now when I say that he wouldn't pick Tracey up between like 11 and 12:30, that's all kind of like different sources have different times. I did read one thing that said that he picked Tracey and a few of her coworkers up and like dropped them off first. So he gave multiple people a ride. And so that could kind of account for like the big time gap, because maybe she got off of work, but like it actually took, you know, a while for her to arrive back at the apartment because they're dropping all these people off. So it sounds like it was closer to 12:30 that they actually got to the apartment. So now we're talking about 6 hours, give or take.
George's alibi, girlfriend and mom.
From what has been reported, and again, it's just police have not released a lot of specifics about George's alibi.
Okay.
But that is what I have read in a few different places. And it should be noted too that one of the sources said that his story kind of changed a few times as well. So I think that's another reason why it's a little up in the air. When Tracey and George arrived at the apartment, they found the door locked, which made sense because that is what Tracey, you know, instructed Tionda to do. But when they entered, the home was empty. The girls were gone, and in their place was a note. The exact text of the note has never been released by police, but it has been reported that it was written by Tionda. And I say that because it was tested by the FBI. If you look at some of the early news articles, it says that like it was assumed to be written by Tionda, but the FBI did check it out. They compared it to handwriting samples from her schoolwork. They compared it to Tracey's handwriting just to see if like she had written the note. I mean, they really worked for a while on this. But according to the FBI, Tionda did write the note. And it said something to the effect that she was going to take Diamond to Tionda's school, which is the nearby Doolittle Elementary, where Tionda was taking summer classes at the time. Then they were going to go to the Lake Meadows shopping center across the street from the school. Now, there's a playground at the school. I mean, like there is at most elementary schools. So Tracey thought that it could be that Tionda was planning on just taking her sister to the playground. But I did read in a couple of articles that Tracey did think that maybe she was taking Diamond actually to the school with her, like to her classes, which I don't know how that would go over, but
I mean, did she have scheduled classes that day?
she did.
But she was supposed to watch.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know. Another very confusing part about this that we'll talk about it in a bit. The contents of the note, like, I'm going to take Diamond to the school, we're going to go to the shopping center, like those activities weren't necessarily unusual.
Mm-hmm.
What was unusual is the fact that she left a note at all. Like, that was not what Tionda did. And for me, again, being a latchkey kid, that stuck with me because I'm like, what? No, like leaving a note is totally normal. You write it on the back of an envelope that you find in the kitchen and like you just say where you're going to be. But then I remembered I was a child in the 80s and this was 2001.
Right.
And Tracey had a cell phone. So it was a bit of a different situation. And so typically.
But did either of the kids have a cell phone?
No, but they had a landline. Because again, it was 2001,
okay,
so
yes,
usually you had
call,
both.
Right?
Yeah.
I was just thinking text, but yeah, right.
No, so they would call. So usually what Tionda would do is she would just call her mom's cell phone and say, hey, can we do this or whatever, right? So that struck Tracey as odd that she would write a note in general. The other thing that Tracey thought was strange is that the note didn't sound like Tionda.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it didn't have her voice. It had her handwriting, but the way she wrote it just did not sound like her. So she was very confused and concerned about the entire thing. Like the whole situation just seemed really odd to her. I also want to kind of take another little sidebar to talk about sources for this episode. There was a show on TV One about 10 years ago called Find Our Missing. It covered this case back in 2012 and seems to have a lot of really good information and interviews with the family. But I say seems because I can't find it streaming anywhere and it's been driving me crazy. So if anyone has a copy of it, like who can give me a link, please do. So I have not been able to actually watch this. What I did find was a blog post that somebody wrote about this episode. And it was contemporaneous. I mean, the post is from 2012 when it aired. The blog is called Searching for the Missing. And, you know, it is just some random person's blog post. So like, this is not, you know, a news or anything. So it's a secondary source. And I want to make that very clear. Mm-hmm. In this post, the author says that despite the fact that George's 3-year-old daughter was unaccounted for, he was reluctant to help Tracey look for the girls and instead just left.
What?
Yeah. And so that's what this said. And so it sounds like that's what, you know, the family said in the episode, maybe. I don't know. Other sources that I've read have said that, like, it's unclear how much he helped in the search, but whether he helped zero or maybe a little, like, he wasn't at the forefront of trying to find his daughter, you know?
Well, up to that point, he hadn't really been in his daughter's life anyways.
Yeah,
so,
very true.
I mean, if that tells you anything.
But interestingly, I found a 2021 Chicago Crusader article in which it says that George told police he never even went back to the apartment that afternoon.
Mm.
So I don't know if he's saying that he didn't even pick Tracey up or that he just like dropped her off and left, like didn't even go up or what, you know?
Well, because if he didn't go and pick her up, then there's holes in his timeline.
Right.
And his alibi.
Yeah, there's holes in a lot of what he says. So Tracey, and it sounds like just Tracey, not George, went around the neighborhood searching for Diamond and Tionda. She knocked on neighbors' doors and asked if anybody had seen them. She went into shops, but she couldn't find her daughters. After a while, she called her mother, Mary Bradley, who immediately left work to help Tracey find the girls. Now, when Mary arrived, she realized that Tracey hadn't called the police. And it's unclear how long after all this, you know, it was before Mary arrived. But regardless, Tracey had not called the police. Basically, Tracey said that she hadn't because she was afraid that they would call CPS because she had left them home alone.
Right.
Basically, she was just hoping she would find the girls herself and not have to alert the authorities, which I'm sure, hindsight being what it is, she's kicking herself for, but I get why she would have made that decision at the time. Yeah. Because 99% of the time, the kids are just playing somewhere or forgot to come home or at a friend's house or whatever. And so she was betting that it was the 99% and not the 1%. However, by about 6:30, it seemed clear that something had happened to Diamond and Tionda, and so Tracey made the call. It sounds as though Chicago PD immediately took this case seriously and began canvassing the area. The initial search lasted the rest of the evening. They also quickly called in the FBI to assist in the search effort. Nearby wooded areas and waterways were searched with canines, boats, and helicopters. And that was all starting like the next day because, it was already 6:30. But yeah, it takes time to get all of that together. And though they didn't immediately, think that this was an abduction, they also didn't go through the whole oh no, she probably just picked up and started a new life with her 3-year-old sister, right? They kind of skipped all of that at least. Yeah. And got straight to, okay, we need to figure out what exactly happened here. As the community learned about Diamond and Tionda's disappearance, they came out in full force, joining the massive police search. Dawn Allen, one of the Bradleys' neighbors, was unsatisfied with the quality of the photos being released by law enforcement. They were black and white and, not great. So she got color pictures of the girls from Tracey and made her own flyers that read, quote, "We are all parents. We feel that pain. Come out as a community. Come out as a family. We have to protect our children." End quote. Wow. As the investigation moved forward, police learned from Doolittle Elementary that Tionda had perfect attendance for summer school up until July 6th. Did she ever have an occasion to bring her younger sister? I don't know. That's my question too. And I couldn't find a single source that mentioned whether or not that had ever happened. Because she had perfect attendance up until July 6th. Classes ran from 9 to 12:30 in the morning. So the upcoming camping trip that they were taking that Friday, shouldn't have been a reason for her absence because it's not like they were planning on leaving in the morning or anything like that. She could have gone to school till 12:30 because they never were going to be leaving earlier. Right. So that's not it. And then the next obvious question is, okay, well, if she had perfect attendance, who usually watched Diamond during the day? Yeah. If Tracey's job was making lunches for summer camp kids, you got to assume that's pretty much the same shift Monday through Friday. Yeah. I don't think she was leaving the 3-year-old by herself. Probably not. So, was it one of the other siblings who usually watched her, who just happened to be at her grandmother's? Who? It doesn't sound like it was ever George. What was the normal plan? And why was this one day where seemingly they deviated from whatever the normal plan was, happened to be the day where these 2 girls go missing? So also, because it's a school and, maybe also because Tionda had perfect attendance, Doolittle Elementary called the house at 10:10 a.m. because she was absent without, a note or any word from her parent, but nobody answered. So at 10:10. At 10:10. So that could mean that something happened to the girls before 10:10, but it could also make sense based on what one of the neighbors told police. Fred Ramsey told police that Tionda knocked on his door around 10 a.m. that morning and asked if his daughter could play. Fred told her no because it was too early. Other neighbors stated that they saw the girls out and about that afternoon. According to the Charlie Project, several children stated that they had seen the girls playing outside around noon, which would have been shortly before Tracey arrived home. Interestingly, another neighbor, Sheila Adams, said that she saw the sisters playing in the complex between 2:30 and 3 p.m., which would have been after Tracey started searching for them. She said that the girls ran up to her as she was taking her children to the beach and asked if she had any candy or juice. Oh. So Sheila Adams was somebody who knew the girls. Like, you know, she had kids too. Like, the girls were always out. Apparently, Tionda had a bicycle, which was like rare around among children in this complex. And because she was such a sweetheart, she would like let other kids ride it and stuff like that. But, you know, on the flip side of that, neighbors also said that the girls had been left alone together often, and that one time Sheila said that she had like fed them because they had been left alone and like didn't have food in the house.
Okay.
So this isn't the situation where like somebody saw girls that could have been them. Like, she knew them.
Yeah.
So she definitely saw them. The only question was it definitely this day, or could she have possibly been thinking of a different day? Because I don't think she was, you know, interviewed by police on that day. I don't know when she was interviewed. So it is a possibility. It's also a possibility that she could have been completely right.
Well, assuming she is right, that puts them in the complex at 2:30?
2:30 or 3, yeah. Several hours after Tracey got home from work.
Right. So where's George at this point? I know.
Yeah.
I know they haven't released it.
But not around, not helping look.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, in my mind, just from what you've said, George is my number one suspect at this point.
Right. We're not done with him. Now, about a week after Diamond and Tionda were last seen, and again, you know, not to skip ahead a week, but that first week, first of all, this was huge news in Chicago. It was not necessarily national news, but this was on the front page of the Chicago Tribune every single day. And they searched everywhere. I mean, it was literally the largest search up to that point in Chicago. And so I read they ended up interviewing over 100 sex offenders. They searched over 5,300 abandoned buildings.
Jesus.
Yeah, they covered like a 20-mile radius, you know, doing ground searches around the apartment. I mean, it was intense. Like, the physical search really, really was very thorough. So a week after, the FBI uncovered surveillance video from a local store called Jewel, which is one of the stores that, you know, the girls were known to have visited because it's just near their house. And there were 2 girls matching the sister's description on that video from that day.
Do we have a time?
You know, we don't. But when police, you know, were interviewing the store employees, none of them remembered seeing Diamond or Tionda that day. Later, the FBI brought the family down and had them view the video, and the family confirmed that it actually was not the girls.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's why we never got a time, because ultimately it didn't matter.
Right.
Yeah. And that was like the first, like, what seems like a big break in the case. And so for the family to see it, you know, a day or two later and say that it wasn't them. And they not only reviewed that tape, but they reviewed other surveillance tape from the area. And they said they didn't see the girls on any of it. It should also be noted that the neighborhood was known for drug dealing. And the apartment building that the Bradleys lived in did have surveillance cameras, but the cameras were pushed up so you could actually see anything. And police believe that that was not necessarily something that was related to this case, but had probably been done before so that, you know, the cameras wouldn't catch drug deals, basically.
Yeah,
other criminal activity.
Wasn't that in an episode of The Wire?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, that did hurt this particular case because we couldn't see the girls coming or going. Along with canvassing the neighborhood and interviewing neighbors, police, of course, also interviewed the family. By the end of the first week, Tracey had been brought into the station 4 times to talk to police. She also took a polygraph, which she passed. Family spokesperson Reverend Corey Brooks told reporters that police had interviewed Tracey for 6 hours Saturday, 8 hours Sunday, and 6 hours Monday.
It's pretty extensive.
Yeah, they really wanted to talk to her. I don't know what was said or done during those interviews, so I have no idea how good or bad they were. But, police did tell reporters, like, in the first few days when they were asked, like, well, what about the fact that she, like, left the girls alone? They were like, that's something we'll deal with later. Like,
we need to find the kids now.
Yeah. Like, that is not our concern at this moment.
Good for them.
Yeah. So they did. I'm sure that came up in those many hours of interviews.
Yes.
But yeah, they were definitely concerned with finding the girls and not trying to be distracted by, like, charging the mom with, like, other things or whatever. Detectives also interviewed George, as he was not only Diamond's father, but one of the last people to see the girls. On July 11th, about a week after their disappearance, the FBI searched his home and garage and questioned him for 2 days, according to George's lawyer.
Well, what does that mean? 2 days? Like,
yeah, we didn't get specifics, but
3 hours over the span of 2 days, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I don't know. But George also took a polygraph, which police sources have said that he passed. But then later, an independent investigator came in, and he's been saying for years now that the test was inconclusive. By Thursday, July 12th, investigators were starting to fear the worst. John Thomas, Chicago PD's first deputy superintendent, told the Chicago Tribune, quote, "The fact that the little girls have not been located at this point certainly does not bode well." End quote. The case, which up to that point had been classified as a missing persons case, was also named a criminal case. As neighbors held nightly vigils, investigators pressed on. They began looking into all of the men in Tracey's life. According to the sources I've read, each of the 4 daughters had a different father, and all of them were interviewed. Tracey had previously sued a man for paternity of Diamond, but testing ruled him out. In June of 2001, just weeks prior to the girl's disappearance, Tionda sued George for paternity.
Uh-huh.
So George wasn't even admitting that he was Diamond's father. He was hanging out.
Uh-huh.
He was seeing Tracey still on and off.
And planning to go on a camping trip with them.
Allegedly. And, but yeah, Tracey had just sued him for paternity because he wouldn't admit that Diamond was his, and obviously was not helping her out at all. And I think that is absolutely key in this story.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's motive. If Diamond's not there, he doesn't have to pay.
Yeah.
And then Tionda just happened to be there.
And Tionda's 10. Like,
right.
She can talk, she can tell people what happened, what's going on, who came, who said what, who did what.
Exactly.
Now, there are also questions surrounding Tionda's paternity. Tracey filed 3 paternity suits against one man whom she dated on and off between 1987 and 1995. This man was from Morocco and was heavily investigated, with a reporter who found out about this, like, even going to Morocco to see if, like, Tionda or Diamond had been taken there. But
tough assignment for that reporter.
I know, right?
Oh, I have to go to Morocco.
Yeah, but nothing ever came of it. And that's why I don't have his name. Like, he's never been named publicly, because it seems like he was pretty much cleared. And from what I've read, although I'm not 100% on this, it does seem as though he wasn't actually Tionda's father. So that, was a kind of a far-flung lead. But yeah, like I said, didn't really go anywhere. One name that kept popping up on the suspect list, though, was one that was said by Tionda herself. All right, so the timing of this discovery is a little murky. I don't know if it happened on day 1, day 2, exactly when, because Tracey did initially make some false statements to police to cover up for the fact that she left her young daughters at home. So we're talking, 6:30 that night when they came over, police, she was making up some stories to make herself not look so bad.
Yeah, I mean, not the best.
Right, but you get where she's coming from.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, like, at one point she said that she had been napping, and when she woke up, the girls were gone. Like, just stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. The problem with doing that to cover your ass is it delays the investigation.
Exactly. So at some point, it comes out. Now, I did see one interview with one of Tracey's sisters, Faith, who said that. So apparently she had been like the one who kind of set up everybody's like cell phone plans in the family or whatever. So at one point she said to Tracey, like, hey, have you like checked your voicemail to see if you missed anything? Now, apparently Tracey did check her voicemail and there was a message from Tionda. Now the story goes at 8:17, the morning of the 6th. So not even 2 hours after Tracey left for work, Tionda called her and, you know, obviously Tracey didn't answer. So she left a message and was like, Mom, George is at the door. Can I open the door? Can we leave? He wants to go get a cake for Victoria.
Mm-hmm.
As you remember, Victoria's birthday was the next day.
Yeah. But if George wanted to get a cake, why would you take the 2 kids?
Yeah. And why would you not tell Tracey or anybody about this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was not seemingly the plan when they left that morning.
Right.
And Tionda had been given strict instructions, like not to open the door for anybody. George was around. She knew George, but like George wasn't their dad. George wasn't their stepdad. George, you know, was just some dude.
Well, yeah, George was one of their dads,
yeah,
but...
right. But like not in action. And so it makes sense that if that George Washington were at the door, she would call her mom to say like, hey, is it okay that I let this dude in?
Yeah.
But when she didn't get a hold of her mom, you could also see a situation in which George could have talked his way in.
I mean, it seems like he did.
Right.
The door was locked.
Yeah.
And nobody was in the house. And I'm assuming there's no sign of forced entry because that probably would have come out.
Correct. You know, obviously, George knew that the girls were home alone, you know, and he was supposed to go on this camping trip with them. So getting a cake for Victoria's birthday the next day, like, fit in with all of this, right? However, George denied ever coming back to the apartment after dropping Tracey off, or, you know, and definitely denied coming back in the middle of the day or later that morning. Now, to add to the confusion, there was also a neighbor named George who the girls knew, who had occasionally babysat for them.
Okay.
But why would like neighbor George buy Victoria a cake or say he was going to buy Victoria a cake or even know that it was Victoria's birthday?
Or again, you can buy a cake without children.
Right.
Like,
also true.
So neither of these Georges were supposed to watch the kids.
Correct.
So
neither one should be buying a cake for anyone and like taking the kids to do that.
Yeah, exactly my point.
Yeah. The other thing though is apparently they called neighbor George by like some nickname. So
she
would have even said George if she was talking about neighbor George.
All right, so it's George.
Right? I mean,
come on.
Yeah. Allegedly.
Allegedly, sure, but unless George has a fucking solid alibi at this point, I'm already sold.
Yeah, and so this is where it gets sticky, though, because obviously this voicemail is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, gigantic piece of evidence. But according to the family, Chicago police accidentally deleted it when they took in Tracey's cell phone. Now, Chicago PD denies that they deleted it and then either can't or won't confirm the existence of this voicemail. It doesn't seem as though it's available to be used as evidence for anything.
So obviously this is 20 years ago?
Yeah, 22 years ago almost. I'm
pretty sure that there is a way to retrieve those within a certain amount of time.
One would think. I just do not know.
I mean, I don't know 100%, but I feel like there is a way to do that. Again, within a certain amount of time, obviously that long ago, like now it's gone for sure. But
yeah, for sure. 22 years later. Yeah. I don't think there's any recovering it, but
we're still talking about the 2000s. So it's not like it was forever ago and they just like didn't know or didn't have forensic specialists that they could talk to or IT people that they could talk to.
Right. But now you're going to get me back on the Bethany Decker case, which was in 2011, 10 years after this, in which they're like, oh, no, we don't have the technology to see like who logged onto a Facebook account or whatever. Like,
all right.
Yeah, I don't know I'm just saying this is what the sources said. At the end of the day, the voicemail is potentially huge, but is a big question mark and does not seemingly currently exist. So despite this extensive investigation, the largest one in Chicago's history, which I mentioned, and a $22,000 reward at the time, leads seemingly began to dry up. However, as the years went on, more information was released regarding the evidence that police gathered during the initial weeks of the investigation and how it seemingly pointed toward George. I don't know how to feel about all this. All right, remember how I mentioned the search of his home and garage?
Yeah.
Law enforcement also searched his car, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Inside the trunk, they found hairs belonging to the Bradley sisters.
Okay. Does he have an excuse for that?
Yes. He said that he had snuck them into drive-ins.
By putting them in the trunk?
Yes. Which, if you watch, like, The Outsiders or American Graffiti, I forget which or both, I mean, like, was a thing back in, I don't know, like the 50s and 60s. I don't know if it was a thing then. You know, people have pointed out that there weren't any drive-ins in Chicago. There were apparently still a few in the suburbs, but it did seem like kind of a stretch.
Mm-hmm.
But even if that's not true, like, you live with me, you are constantly complaining that my hair is everywhere in places that it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So if he's around the family, if the kids have been in his car just for normal reasons, not even in the trunk, like, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility to me that hair could have ended up in the trunk, like, for completely innocent reasons. Like, if they had bags of theirs that had been thrown in the trunk, like, a hair could have fallen off of that.
Okay. I'll give you that. But the fact that this dude is saying that he stuffed them in a trunk to quote unquote sneak them into a drive-in?
No, I mean, that's dumb as hell. Like, don't get me wrong. But I mean, all I'll say is that sometimes people, when they get nervous, say dumb things, even if it's not to cover up a murder. I don't know. Not that I'm trying to defend this guy, as you will see. All I'm saying is that if it were just that, I'd be like, maybe. But a 2021 Chicago Sun-Times article states that 4 teenagers and 3 neighbors saw George setting fire to something in a 55-gallon drum in his garage shortly after the girl's disappearance, and then putting the barrel into the trunk of his car and driving away.
Well, that's not a good sign.
No. But a 2001 Chicago Tribune article, so an article that came out literally the day after this search was performed, stated that when police had asked neighbors if George had burned anything recently, they said that they hadn't seen anything. So, I always tend to trust, like, the contemporaneous articles more than, like, an article 20 years later.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you're working to try to get breaking news, sometimes things get missed. So maybe, like, the neighbors who were asked in 2001 truly didn't see anything, and it was different neighbors who came forward later at some point and said that they had seen him burning something. I don't know, because obviously, like, we don't know who the neighbors are or
right.
anything like that. But I do want to point out, in the interest of fairness, that there are 2 very different stories being reported.
Mm-hmm.
However, one thing that wasn't mentioned at all in 2001 for obvious reasons, but did come out in this 2021 article that I mentioned, was that when police searched the garage, they reportedly found rubber gloves, contractor trash bags, and bleach. And some of the bags and gloves were missing. Police were also able to obtain the Home Depot receipt showing that the items had been purchased recently. Now, this article said recently. I read another article that said after the girl's disappearance. I can't swear to that, but it was definitely within a time frame that would make it feel relevant.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we actually have all of those things in our garage.
We do.
However,
and zip ties.
Yes. However, the construction trash bags were left by the previous owner. Like, you know what I mean?
And I think that we do have all of those items, but they've all been bought at different times.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. Yeah,
and that's the thing. It's like you don't often buy all of these things for innocent reasons, like during one trip. It's like you buy gloves for one thing, you buy the bags for another thing, you buy the zip ties for this thing, and it's like,
yeah,
you buy them for these different projects that are all innocent, but it's like when you're buying it all together, when these two little girls have gone missing, it does not look good.
Yeah.
In this article, it said that the family at the time in 2001 had pressured prosecutors to file charges against George, but prosecutors declined, citing a lack of evidence. Now, to this day, George maintains his innocence, saying that everyone ganged up on him because they couldn't solve the case.
Or could it be that the evidence was all pointing to you?
Yeah, and it is interesting because, like I said, that whole thing with the Home Depot trip was not released in 2001, and so I think if you take that out, it's like, yeah, there's some circumstantial stuff, but nothing so solid. I mean, that's not solid, but damn, it does not look good.
Right, and I'm sure that the police weren't releasing it back then because that could have been their biggest piece of evidence at the time, and they were holding that back from being released.
Right.
So that they could use it in trial.
Right. And hoping that the bodies would be found too, right? Yeah. As the years went on, the family continued to do interviews to keep the sisters in the spotlight. Their Chicago community held daily vigils for the first 40 days.
Wow.
And they've held annual vigils for the missing girls ever since. And I do want to take a moment to talk about Tracey because Tracey's gotten a lot of bad press. And again, a lot of it is, because she left the girls at home in the first place. The police kept on telling reporters that she wasn't being cooperative. But it should be said that at the very beginning, she was extremely cooperative. At the beginning, meaning the first week or two, police said that publicly. She was being very cooperative. She passed her polygraph. She came in all these times, blah, 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 blah. But between July of 2001, when the girls went missing, and March of 2002, they brought her in a total of 14 times or something like that. And she just grew very distrustful of the police and very just kind of done with the whole thing because in her mind, she had nothing to do with it and they were just harassing her at that point instead of trying to find her girls. So there was an alleged incident in March of 2002 where police tried to bring her in again and she got mad and pushed one of the officers and the officers went right to the press and was like, she pushed us and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I didn't, but I can't do this anymore. After that, there's been kind of this general feeling among people who follow the case that she kind of stopped participating in the search for her girls. She kind of stepped away. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is because her sisters and other family members have been more forward facing and more vocal in terms of doing interviews and things like that. But Tracey's been there the entire time. I mean, she's been going to vigils. She has been doing the occasional interview, though not as much. And on the 20th anniversary of the girls' disappearance back in 2021, she was there. She was at the vigils. She was speaking out. She was talking to people. So she has been there the entire time. So I do just want to kind of put that out there. Within the last 20 years or so, tips have obviously continued to come in and hopes were repeatedly dashed. Several years after their disappearance, the girls' aunt received emails from someone claiming to be Tionda. Now, this was back in 2008, and Tionda managed to track down the sender's MySpace page and saw the pictures and was like, holy shit, this looks like Tionda. Mm-hmm. And took it to police and everything. And somehow a facial recognition expert got involved. I don't know if he was contacted personally by the family or contacted by police. And this world-renowned facial recognition expert looked at these MySpace pictures and was like, I think that's Tionda. And so police, looked into it and investigated, and it turned out that it was not. I don't think she took a DNA test. I think they were just able to figure it out by, documentation, whatever. I've never read anything that went into like huge detail on that. But that was like the first crushing blow, because it seemed like they were really sure, like, oh my God, this is her. Then in 2019, another woman from Texas started posting on Facebook saying that she was Tionda. And she was posting all these things, and then she started like texting the family members and was going back and forth with them. And they would like question her, they kept on questioning her more. And then she was like getting hostile with them. And then she just stopped responding altogether. And, it was basically turned out to be a hoax, which is just
terrible.
Horrible.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrible. And so the Bradley family has gotten their hopes up so many times over the years, only to have them dashed. But then, just this year, in May 2023, another woman from Texas, oddly enough, but not the first Texas woman, has shown up claiming to be Diamond Bradley.
Oh.
And both the family and the FBI seem to be taking her claims seriously. The woman who appeared in a TikTok video, which the original video has now been deleted from what I can see, but she claims she is the missing Chicago girl. She eventually reached out to Sheila Bradley Smith, Tracey's sister, who has been the public face of the family for years. So when I talk about like the interviews and all of that kind of stuff, Sheila's usually the one who you see.
Mm-hmm.
And so she reached out to Sheila, and eventually, I guess, after they kind of communicated on Facebook a little bit, they had a very long phone call. And the woman in this call claimed that she, quote, remembered being in a car and being around Tionda for a while, but then she said she was taken away and never saw her again, end quote.
Interesting.
Yeah, the woman also got in touch with the FBI, and according to a later video she made, they told her basically that her identity that she'd been going by for her 20 however many years didn't exist. And that's actually how this all started in the first place. Like, she went to apply for a job or something along those lines, and had to have a background check done. And the background check came back and was like, you're not a person. So then she was like, okay, well, what does this mean? And then kind of started digging into things, and then I guess found information on Diamond and Tionda, and then it kind of went from there. She has a scar on her forehead, which is apparently similar to a scar that Diamond has. So there are different physical things like that. Like I said, she's been in contact with the FBI, and because the family seems to think that this is somewhat viable, the FBI has done a DNA test on her, and we're currently, as of this recording, which is June 7th, we are currently awaiting the results on that, which of course we will bring you as soon as those are announced.
Yeah.
Having been down this road before, the Bradley family is understandably wary. Sheila said, quote, "It's been heartbreaking. It will lift you up and give you the hope and slam you back down on the ground," end quote. However, she also went on to say that this woman is the first one claiming to be one of the sisters who actually was excited about taking a DNA test. So it seems as though whether or not she is actually Diamond, like, she genuinely believes that she could be. So it doesn't sound like it's a hoax, at the very least.
Right.
Now, over the years, as I mentioned earlier, Tracey has received a great deal of criticism from people saying that she was irresponsible for leaving her daughters home alone, to those who said she was directly responsible for their disappearance. One pervasive rumor, which has come back up after this woman came forward on TikTok, claims that Tracey was addicted to drugs at the time of her daughter's disappearance and sold the girls to pay off a debt.
Okay. I mean, that's just somebody throwing things out there.
Yeah, and it really pisses me off because there's just literally no proof of this whatsoever. And that's a fucked up thing to say about a person with no proof, you know? Not to say that that's never happened, because obviously it has. There are a lot of garbage people out there who do terrible things. But from what I've been able to find, Tracey has no criminal history whatsoever beyond a few traffic tickets. It's hard for me to believe that in the years prior to their disappearance, or in the 20 plus years since, that someone who is apparently into drugs deeply enough that she would sell 2 of her children would manage to evade any sort of arrest.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's just stupid.
I mean, you're not going to get popped for possession at one point.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, especially during one of those traffic stops, which like are on her record, you know, like give me a fucking break.
And doesn't she works for a school, right? Or summer school? Or
yeah, it was like she worked, I think it was like a county or a city job or something like that. I mean,
yeah. I mean, I get that they don't necessarily have like random drug testing for that position, but like if she was that far into it, I feel like somebody probably would have noticed.
Yeah, I think that people look at the fact that she's a Black woman living in a low-income area. This is the south side of Chicago that we're talking about. Her 2 kids go missing. She has, 4 kids, 4 different dads. And they're like, oh, she must be on crack and sold them for drugs.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to note that, in one of the Chicago Tribune articles from 2001, when this was all originally happening, they mentioned that there had never been a DCFS or, CPS, whatever case opened regarding Diamond or Tionda. So not only did Tracey not have any sort of arrest record, but she had no CPS record either. Like, she was concerned about that, obviously, because she was leaving them alone. She knew that that was not right. But this isn't a situation where this was a home that the authorities had been involved,
Right.
And I just don't believe that you just can sell kids out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Without anything happening before or after.
Yeah. It's somebody being an asshole online.
Now, with that being said, it does seem as though the most likely scenario is that the girls were abducted by someone they knew. Everyone who knew Tionda insists that she never would have opened the door for just anybody. And going back to George Washington, I did read in one of the sources that when police pressed him about this camping trip, like he could not provide any proof that it existed. Like they couldn't find camping equipment or reservations at a campground or anything like that.
So that was his story?
That was apparently his story. Yeah. And I don't know if Tracey corroborated that story. I don't know what the situation is there because that's not something that the police have, released.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it doesn't even seem that the camping story was even real potentially. So like this guy stinks to high hell. But with that said, he is still periodically talking to the press. Like he was interviewed for USA Today just a few years ago. And that was that quote that I said earlier in which, he was innocent and people ganged up on him because they couldn't solve the case. Like he's still kind of out there, but from what I understand has never actually helped with anything. The child support angle, I think, is a good one. I don't know if he had other children. I don't know what the situation was there, but we see this time and time again in these cases. I mean, you look at the Akia Eggleston case, and the man who murdered her was already with another woman, and they had several kids together, and he had been sued several times by another woman for child support. Like he was already in arrears when it came to child support with other women. And so like, in his mind, Akia's child was going to just add more to that. And that was a motive for murder. I'm not saying it was here because I don't really know, but it very well could have been.
Yeah,
and
I mean, hey, it is a motive.
It is,
There's
right?
a potential motive. So,
and given the fact that he knew the kids were alone, that this seemingly was not the normal routine, because up until this day, Tionda had been at every single one of her summer classes.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense that this was just some random abduction. That again, it makes sense that it wasn't captured on any of the complex CCTVs because they were all turned up, but like there were other surveillance cameras in the area that showed nothing. It didn't show them at the shopping center, at the school, at the playground, et cetera, like where they could have just been snatched by some stranger. And the girls were well known in their complex. So if they had been playing outside and some stranger had been talking to them there, chances are somebody would have noticed. But if somebody who they knew came to the house, talked their way in, and left with the girls voluntarily, there's a good chance that nobody would have noticed that. Because there's nothing to notice.
Yeah.
In the last couple of years, the Bradley family, including Tracey, have asked the new state's attorney in Chicago to reopen the case and to take another look at it and, possibly bring charges. The state's attorney has stated that they have not officially been asked to do so by police. So they kind of have to be asked by official channels, not just the family. So they haven't. Chicago PD says that they have been keeping the state's attorney's office apprised of any new information in the case, but it just doesn't sound like anything is really happening or going anywhere. It'll be 22 years, about a month after this recording, and no trace of the girls has been found. Whether they were taken and killed by George Washington in order to perhaps avoid paying child support, we don't know. But there is this woman out there who has taken a DNA test, and the results of this test may bring us closer to answers than we've been since 2001. Tionda Bradley was 4 feet 2 inches tall and approximately 70 pounds at the time of her disappearance. She was African American with a medium complexion, brown eyes, and black hair and pigtails. She was 10 years old when she went missing. She would be 32 today. Diamond Bradley was 3 feet tall and approximately 35 pounds at the time of her disappearance. She was African American with a medium complexion, brown eyes, and black hair and ponytails. Diamond was 3 years old when she went missing. She would be 25 today. If you have any information on the disappearance of Diamond and Tionda Bradley, please contact the Chicago Police Department at 312-747-8380 or your local FBI office or the nearest American embassy or consulate. The family's private detective can be reached at 847-579-9771. You can see all the sources for this episode along with photos and videos at our website, andthentheywere.gone.com.
Be sure to follow us on social, and then They Were Gone Pod on Facebook and at ATTWG Pod on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe and consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It will help new listeners find us. And the more people that listen, the more chances we have of bringing someone home.
And we'll see you here next week for a brand new episode.
See you next week.
And Then They Were Gone is hosted by Kona Gallagher and Ethan Flick. Our research, writing, and editing is done by Kona Gallagher. Theme music is The Stork by Ketsa. Additional music is provided by Kai Engel. And Then They Were Gone is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!